Before I say one more word, picture this. A man is standing in front of a coffin. His best friend is inside it. The whole town is crying. And this man's face doesn't move. Not because he's strong. Not because he's holding it together. Because he has done this so many times, he doesn't know how to feel it anymore. That man is Pastor Jeff from Young Sheldon. And I need you to sit with that for a second because everyone, and I mean everyone, has this guy filed away in their brain as the goofy Texas preacher. Bad shirts, big smile, comic relief. The harmless background character who shows up to crack a joke and disappear, that is the biggest misread in the entire show. By the time this video ends, you are going to watch Pastor Jeff completely differently. You're going to see a man who spent 20 years mastering something most people never even notice they're doing, managing every single relationship in his life like it's a transaction. Not out of evil, out of something much colder and much more common than you think. Stick around because the moment I'm about to show you, the one at George's funeral, is the exact moment the mask should have slipped for everyone watching. It didn't. And I'm going to show you why that's the scariest part of this whole story. Let's start at the beginning. Because Jeff didn't become this way overnight. The show hands us the blueprint early and almost nobody clocks it. Here's what you probably remember about Pastor Jeff's first marriage. His wife Selena leaves him. He's devastated. He ends up crashing on the couch in his own church office and eventually camping out at the Cooper house, looking like a man whose whole world fell apart. The show frames it as heartbreak. Poor pastor. Wife walked out. Now he's got nowhere to go. But ask yourself one question, why did Selena actually leave? She left because Jeff lied to her. Not a small lie either. He let her believe he was financially well off before they got married. He built the entire foundation of that relationship on an image, not the truth. And when that image cracked, so did the marriage. Now here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. When Selena found out and left, where did Jeff go? Not into grief. Not into isolation to process what he'd lost. He went straight to Mary Cooper's house, visibly rattled, and it wasn't because he'd lost the love of his life. It's because a divorced pastor is a walking scandal in a small Texas town. His marriage wasn't just a relationship, it was part of his job title. And when it collapsed, his first instinct wasn't heartbreak, it was damage control. And this is where it gets interesting, because watch what happens next. Enter Robin. Think about who Robin is for a second. She's not just the next woman who happened to come along. She's a police officer, structured, respected. The kind of partner that instantly repairs a shaky reputation, because now the story isn't the pastor who got dumped, it's the pastor who married a cop. Status restored, credibility restored. Just like that, Jeff is the model shepherd again. I'm not saying the writers sat down and mapped out a manipulation chart for this character. I'm saying that if you watch the actual pattern of behavior, lie to maintain image, panic when the image breaks, immediately rebuild the image through the next relationship, that's not a coincidence. That's a habit. And habits tell you more about a person than their words ever will. This is the first crack in the harmless pastor idea. But it's a small crack. The real fracture comes later, and it's so much worse than a lie about money. Let's talk about George. If you've watched the finale, you know George Cooper dies. And you know who runs the funeral. Pastor Jeff. Now think about what you actually know about their relationship off camera, away from the pews. George didn't believe in any of it. He went to church because Mary made him go. In private, Jeff and George weren't pastor and parishioner. They were just two guys. They drank beer together. They watched football together. They joked about church stuff behind closed doors the way two friends do when nobody official is listening. So when George dies, the man standing at the front of that funeral isn't just a pastor doing his job. He's supposed to be a friend, grieving a real loss. Here's the moment that should break your heart in a completely different way than you expect. Watch Mary's face during that funeral. She looks at Jeff like he's her anchor, like he's the one person who can hold her together in the worst moment of her life. Now watch Jeff's face. There's no grief in it. There's no real personal sorrow. What's actually on his face is professionalism. It's the expression of a man running through a routine he has run 100 times before, because he has. This isn't his first funeral. It's not his 50th. And in that moment, when the one thing the situation actually calls for is a human being showing up as a human being, Jeff shows up as a role. Think about what a real friend does in that moment. A real friend sits at the kitchen table with Mary afterward and says something honest. Something like, I don't know what to say, George wasn't exactly a believer, but he loved you and those kids more than anything. A real friend lets the moment be messy and human instead of polished and rehearsed. A real friend admits they're just as lost as everyone else in the room. Jeff doesn't do that. He turns George's death into another service. Another proof point that he is the center of Medford's spiritual life. the guy you turn to, the guy who's always there. And here's the detail that makes it even harder to shake once you notice it. This isn't a stranger conducting a funeral by the book. This is a man who spent years sitting across from George at the kitchen table, who knew exactly how George felt about God, about church, about the whole performance of Sunday mornings, and who still stood up in front of the entire town and delivered a service built on a version of George that barely existed. Not because he wanted to lie, because the role doesn't have room for the truth. The role only knows how to produce comfort, on schedule, on demand, regardless of what's actually true underneath it. That's the thing about a man who's spent 2 decades being the pastor. At some point, the job stops being something he does and starts being something he can't stop doing, even in the one moment where stopping was exactly what the people around him needed. And if you think that's the worst part, it's not. Here's where it actually turns into something much colder. A few episodes after the funeral, Jeff starts showing up at the house more, helping out, checking in. On the surface, that reads as kindness, a caring pastor supporting a grieving widow. But look at it from a different angle. Mary is grieving. Mary is at her most vulnerable point in the entire series. And the person tightening his presence around her isn't a friend easing her pain. He's a shepherd who just watched his most loyal sheep lose her footing. And instead of letting her find her own way back, he's right there to guide every step of it. More time at church, more money, more dependency on him specifically. And here's the part that actually makes this scarier than if Jeff were some obvious villain twirling a mustache. He's probably not even doing this on purpose. He's not calculating it consciously scene by scene. He has played the role of the pastor for so many years that the role and the man have fused into one thing. He can't take it off anymore, not even to bury his own friend. That's not a bad guy. That's something much sadder, a person who lost track of who he actually is a long, long time ago, and now only exists through a function he performs for other people. And think about what that means for Mary specifically, because she's the one absorbing all of it. She's not choosing to lean on an empty performance. She has no idea that's what she's leaning on. From where she's standing, Jeff is the one constant, the one person who never wavers, never breaks, never shows a crack. To a woman who is terrified underneath her own righteousness, that kind of steadiness looks like exactly what she needs. She has no way of knowing that the steadiness isn't strength. It's just a role that never gets switched off. Sit with that for a second, because it's about to show up again in a scene so small, you probably didn't think twice about it the first time you watched it. Remember when young Sheldon walks into church looking for a fight, not physically, intellectually. He wants to take Jeff apart over science versus religion, because that's what Sheldon does. He finds the weakest argument in the room and goes straight for it. And Jeff does something that, on the surface, looks genuinely admirable. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't raise his voice. He smiles, tells Sheldon those are good questions, and says he'll think it over and get back to him. Most people watching that scene think, what a mature, secure way to handle a bratty kid. Here's what's actually happening underneath it. Jeff knows instantly that he cannot win this argument in real time. Sheldon is sharper than him on this specific terrain, and a public back and forth is a fight Jeff loses in front of an audience. So instead of losing on the spot, he does something incredibly strategic. He exits the arena where he's weak and moves the conversation to ground where he has the advantage. Vague, warm, non-committal. Let me think about it. Friendly tone, indefinite delay. In that new setting, Sheldon stops being a threat and just becomes a kid again. And Jeff is back in full control. It's a tiny moment, 10 seconds of screen time maybe, but it's the clearest, most compressed version of everything Jeff does throughout the entire show. Whatever the relationship, Mary, George, Selena, Sheldon, the pattern never changes. Find the angle where you keep the upper hand, retreat the second you don't have it. Come back on your own terms. With Mary, that angle is the job and the emotional need she has for structure and guidance. With George, it was a friendship that was never actually equal, even though it looked like one over beers. With Selena, it was a lie dressed up as a marriage. With Sheldon, it was 4 words, I'll get back to you. And nobody in Medford ever puts these pieces together. Why would they? Jeff smiles. Jeff helps. Jeff says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. In a small town, that's not just enough to get by, that's enough to make people treat you like a saint. Here's where all of this actually leads, and it's bigger than just one character. When you rewatch Young Sheldon paying close attention to Jeff, you realize the show was never only about a child genius growing up in a small town. It's about a house full of adults, all quietly performing roles they built for themselves, because the truth underneath was too hard to sit with. George plays the tired, checked-out dad, even though there's clearly more going on underneath that he never lets out. Mary plays the righteous, faithful woman, even while she's privately terrified almost all the time. Meemaw plays the fun, wild grandma while carrying more damage than anyone in that house wants to admit. And Jeff plays the kind, easygoing pastor. Here's the difference that matters. Every single one of those other characters cracks eventually. George drinks to cope. Mary breaks down and cries when nobody's watching. Meemaw, in her own blunt way, tells hard truths out loud when it counts. Jeff never cracks, not once. Not in a single episode across the entire run of the show. And that not the lying, not the funeral, not the strategic retreats. That is genuinely the most unsettling thing you can say about a person. Because someone who never, ever takes the mask off isn't someone with an unusually strong will. They're someone who has nothing left underneath the mask to protect. The performance isn't covering something anymore. The performance is all that's left, and that's really the difference between Jeff and everyone else on this show. The others are people wearing a costume that occasionally slips. Jeff isn't wearing a costume anymore. The costume grew into the skin. That's not a plot twist you'll ever see spelled out in an episode. It's something you only notice once you stop laughing at the funny pastor jokes long enough to actually watch what the man does with his face when nobody's supposed to be paying attention to it. Once you see that, you cannot watch the show the same way again. Every scene with Jeff stops being warm and starts being quietly unsettling. Every smile reads like it's been calculated for effect. Every sermon starts to feel less like faith and more like a performance running on autopilot. And you start feeling sorry for Mary, not because she lost her husband, though that's real and it's devastating. You feel sorry for her because the one person she leans on spiritually, the one steady hand she trusts through the worst period of her life, is a man who's been running on empty inside for years and is very, very good at hiding it. The show never spells any of this out. It's a warm, nostalgic family sitcom. After all, it was never going to hand you this reading on a plate. But if you go back and actually watch the small moments, the ones that seem like throwaway comedy beats, it's all right there in plain sight. The bad shirts, the easy smile, the gentle Texas drawl that never once cracks under pressure. All of it was hiding in plain sight the entire time, dressed up as comic relief so nobody would look twice. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. Here's the part that actually stays with me the longest, though. It's not that Jeff is unusual, it's that he's not. Most of us have met a version of Jeff, the person at work, in a friend group, sometimes even in a family, who is unfailingly warm, endlessly reliable, always says the right thing at the right moment, and who we never once stop to ask what is actually happening underneath that. We just accept the comfort and move on the same way Medford does with Jeff, week after week, Sunday after Sunday. The show isn't warning you about a preacher. It's quietly warning you about anyone whose kindness never once costs them anything. Pastor Jeff isn't the villain of Young Sheldon. He's something quieter and honestly more familiar than that. He's a reminder that the people who do the most damage in our lives are rarely the ones who shout or threaten or make a scene. It's the ones who smile at us for years, who say all the right things at all the right moments, who make themselves so consistently comforting that we stop asking what's actually underneath the comfort until one day we're depending on their version of reality more than our own. And if you want one more detail to sit with before you go, remember that this is also the same pastor who secretly baptized baby Cece without her parents' knowledge or permission. Same guy, same pattern, every single time. So, do you think Jeff even realizes what he's become? Or is that exactly the point that men like him never do? Drop your take in the comments. I want to know if you saw this the first time you watched, or if this is the video that just changed the whole show for you.